This is a tape with Mrs. Allegra Scyoc and Ms. Catherine Everts. Everts, who were the daughters of Mr. Firestone. What was his first name? Timothy Derham Firestone, who was the senior observer at the Hannibal weather station for a number of years. These two ladies remember some of the things which happened to them and to their father while he was working in the old Hannibal weather station. So let's start out here. Would you ladies please tell us a little bit about yourselves, where you were born and how your father come to Hannibal?
Well, Papa came to Hannibal in 1906. It was by literally an accident. Mr. Waldron had gone up the North River Road in a horse and buggy, and the horse had reared. They thought a snake had scared it and threw him out of the buggy, and it broke his ankle. So they had to have someone at the station right away. Well, Papa had entered the service at first in Duluth, Minnesota, and he served his probationary 6 months up above the clouds, literally. And they were to be going to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and they had their household goods on the train, and they were all packed to leave when they heard that Mr. Waldron had had this accident. So they switched the trains and sent him to Hannibal.
That's an interesting story. Well, now, where was his home originally?
They lived in Indiana. My dad was a superintendent of schools and a principal, and had taught for 13 years. And
what town in Indiana?
Well, several places in Indiana. Let's see, where was Otis born? North Liberty, I think. My sister was born at North Liberty, and Mama had taught 10 years before then. And
what was her maiden name?
Minnie Bell Nyhard. And she was born near Goshen, Indiana, and she had taught school, and they were both teachers. They used to go courting on their bicycles. She had the first woman's bicycle in the county. It cost $80. Oh, it was a tremendous price. And I think she said she got $30 a month for teaching, and she did her own, got her own firewood. She swept her own room, and a lot of the bigger boys were glad to help out. And
Where was your father born?
he was born in Ohio, Warrens County, Ohio.
Warren.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the year?
Oh, yes. He was born November the 22nd, 1872. And Mama was born the 2nd of February. No, 3rd of February, excuse me. 3rd of February in 1872.
You have on the tape, of course, how long she taught and how long he did. And then he was probably just interested in going into the...
Well,
Do you know where he took his teacher training?
yes, he got a BS degree from Angola Indiana University. It's still there.
Well, now, were you girls born here
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
in Hannibal?
Now, Otis wasn't. She was born in Duluth, Minnesota.
No, she was born in North Liberty, Indiana.
Just one. Okay.
Well, Papa and Mama both received their degree from Angola, Indiana, and that is where they met and were married after they finished school and went to Niagara Falls on their honeymoon, and also they went to the what was that called? It wasn't wasn't a World's Fair, but it was what?
What year was it?
About 1904, I think. I got a
St. Louis World's Fair?
thing with it on. I can't tell you.
What was that called? Exposition?
Exposition.
Yes,
that's
that's
what it was called.
Yeah. Louisiana Exposition.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a Louisiana Exposition in 1904, St. Louis. We refer to now as St. Louis Fair. But
Well, now they went to the Chicago Fair, but that was in 33, 32,
Yes, that
and
was
33.
But on their wedding, at their
But
honeymoon.
I don't know, except that they did go to Niagara Falls, and another couple, Papa's best friend went with them. They went together, the two couples.
Well, now, where did your folks live when they first came to Hannibal? Do you know?
Yes, they lived on the corner of 7th and Broadway, down where, is it Clayton's have their building now? There was a house there. And across the street from the post office, and it was just a muddy track, was the Methodist Church where Silverberg's used to be. And that's where they went to church. And it was right there handy.
Well, now, so where was Silverberg's located?
Sort of where it used to be. Now let's see what's there now.
Loan office or
Yes.
investment office.
Yes.
Oh, I see.
Across from Clayton.
Yeah.
The Methodist Church was across the street when they built, and then
when they built the new one, why, they continued going down there, and Papa and Mama both taught Sunday school classes. Even if he had the Weather Bureau operated 7 days a week, and there was an automatic timer, I guess you'd call it, up on the roof, and Papa had to go up on the roof and be there by 6 o'clock to take certain recordings, and they were recorded at the time that you were up there, and that was recorded in Washington, D.C. So in all those years, see, he was in the Weather Bureau 29 3/4 years. And during that time, he was never late but once. And one time, see, you had to go up through 3 flights and unlock each door. And he went up there, and the lock it had rained and frozen, and the lock wouldn't open. And he didn't have any matches because he didn't smoke. So he had to go down all those flights of stairs and back up with matches and light them and thaw out the lock.
turned out.
Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah,
Well,
that's good.
he got up there, but he was, I think, 2 minutes late, and it was recorded that he was late 2 minutes.
Well, now,
He
was
felt
this
awfully
done by
bad.
telegraph back in Washington, D.C., the timing device? Or
No,
just
it was on the roof. It was
Uh,
mechanical on the
I
roof.
see.
Now, I don't know whether it went straight back there or the records were sent back.
Maybe on a tape.
It was
recording.
on something, but it was recorded if you were you were
Those
late.
marble steps in the post office, he had to climb, and then when he got on that last floor to go to the cupola, he had to climb this big ladder. Now those were 12-foot ceilings or more?
And there were 3, and you could
Yes.
look down that steps.
And he
were
did
iron.
that all those years, 7 days a week.
Now, this was an actual ladder, not steps.
No,
Yes.
it was steps. They were steps. They were iron,
Yes.
so
I
big,
see.
and there was nothing. They didn't have any rise behind them.
I see.
You could
Just
look
open.
down
Just
all those
That
flights.
used to scare
You
me
went
to
up.
death.
And it was- the whole place was full of broken glass, but I used to remember I could squint my eyes and I wouldn't look down, because when I did look down, you could see all those flights down there and all that broken glass. And it was 3 stories or 3 stories up. Well, Papa had to go up there once a month, and up at the top, it was just a little thing, and it had an iron grill around it. And he had to get up on the edge near that grill. And one time when it was icy, he always took his umbrella with him, and it had a handle, and he used that to hold on to, and he slipped. And it was the only thing that saved him of going over. It was this crook on his umbrella.
Wow. that would have
But
been
it was a
dangerous
dangerous
up there when
place.
it's icy. Yeah.
They didn't have to go
Well,
up
it's
there,
still
though.
up there.
Is it?
Oh, yes, I think
Is
it's...
that on the
It's on that thing-
southwest corner? Would that be the southwest corner of that old building?
Yes.
Southwest, southeast.
Up the,
Where's it? You've got... Let's look in here.
Southeast would be toward town.
Yes, it was towards town. Maybe I put these in the Firestone folder instead of in here. But I'm sure it was on... or I think it was on the southeast part.
Were there parapets kind of like that on each of the corners? Or
No.
just on a couple
Just
of the
that
corners? Just that one corner?
That one had the one
Yeah,
big one that
yeah,
stuck up. I
Okay.
don't seem to have
That's
it.
right. That's right.
That's my mother. Now this is a picture of Pop and Mama. This picture was taken for him. It had to be a full-length photograph when he applied for the Weather Service. They had sent him there. He had a BS degree. Then they sent him to Madison, Wisconsin for training. And
Well, how old would you girls have been the first time, approximately, the first time you went up into the weather bureau, weather office?
well, she was born in 1908, and I was born in 1910. And I have no idea how early we were taken down there, but I remember that later on, when there were parades and things, why we'd all go down to the post office. It had a big circular or semicircular window, and we'd get up on that window. It had big wide sills, and we'd sit up there and watch the parade go by, and we could look down and see the parade.
They had no screens or
Oh,
any
it was-
protection, and I know our mother used to just live a living death, thinking that we were going to be killed falling out that window.
We'd sit on it with our feet hanging out.
Oh, sure.
Oh yes, kid like you know, and she never. I knew she was very worried about us anyway. But that was a treat because we didn't just run down there to play, but we did go down there to play, waiting for him to get through work at 4 in the afternoon with Dr. McKinney's son, Franklin McKinney. We used to play out there on the Weather Bureau, the lawn of the Weather Bureau.
Well, now,
Federal building.
your first home, or your father's first home, was right there on the corner of 7th and
Yes.
Broadway. Did they live there?
We weren't born.
Not long, no.
Then where was your home?
Well, first, we were born on Rock Street. Let's see, it was, 805 Rock. And when I was just a baby, they built that house on 508 North 8th, and they owned it. They bought the land, they improved it, and I think at one time Papa got an award for having made the most improvement for any place in the city. They used to give those. And when she was a baby, just 4 months old, she won a prize as being the prettiest baby in Hannibal.
Hey, how about that?
And we had the pictures. I don't know if I might even have one in here. I don't know.
Well, it pertained all your life. Now, how about
Yes,
that?
all of our life.
Sure, sure.
Both of us.
Do you recall any incidents with the instruments that your father talked about, or that you might have had as children in the
Well,
place?
He specialized in the river part, and whenever there was any floods or anything, he'd have to go out to Salt River. And I can remember it was after we had a car, and that was in 1923 when we bought a car. And he'd take us all along. We'd go out there, and I remember one time the water was up to he had to walk to the middle of the bridge is where the gauge was. And I remember him rolling up his pants leg and taking off his shoes and walking out the middle of the bridge because there was water on it. It was up over the bridge.
Now that would have been a metal bridge, or was that the covered bridge?
No, that was metal.
Metal. I remember the old covered
Yes.
bridge that was there.
Well, he also had to,
On Salt River.
he had to contact Mr. Becker at the bridge, the Wabash Bridge, every day to get the weather report, or the water level. And they talked to each other every morning for many, many years before they met. And finally, they did meet personally, and we became good friends of the Beckers.
Wonder what Mr. Becker's first name was. I can look it up.
I
Look it
can't
up.
tell you. I tried to think of that when I thought about the Beckers. And I could remember Virginia, the youngest daughter, was in school with me, and then there was another girl, and then there was the boy older, Francis. And I can't think of her name either. But she was about Ona's age. And
Very
they were good.
attractive. Well, Virginia Becker, Briscoe. She is a Briscoe and lives here in Hannibal.
She could probably tell you more about the workings on the bridge,
Oh, yes, that would be very
because he was
interesting.
there for many, many years.
Well, now you have some things written down here. Why don't we start down on these paragraphs and tell us what you have on this on the paper there.
Well,
Let's see, little personal things. Let's see
what
where.
about Mama teaching?
Well, here's about Papa and the Iris, and
What about your father and the Irons?
it's down here a little
Yes,
ways.
come on.
Will you tell him?
Well, he specialized in raising iris, and at the time, of course, people did not have a lot of varieties like, of course, we do nowadays. But Papa really took care of them, and he really was considered having more iris than anyone in northeast Missouri. And in the spring around Decoration Day, people would come to see those. And I can recall them having big tubs of iris in our basement. And people would come to buy them because there weren't flowers to be available. Flowers weren't available then like they are later.
They also, this Mr. Powell, I don't know what his given name was, but he had gone to China. The Powells were missionaries in China, and when he came back to Hannibal, Papa gave him a great big bunch of iris that he took back to China, and Mr. Powell brought him tea, and I still have a little satin-covered box that held some of the tea.
Now this was
J.B. Powell.
J.B. Powell.
Uh-huh. And Papa also gave iris to the highway department, and out towards New London they were planted along the bank. There was a deep cut with the rock on each side, and up above that there were just dozens and dozens of plants of iris. And years later, when I was back here, I had seen them up there, but I looked again when I came back this last time, and everything's different. It's all changed, and there weren't any iris. But they lived for many years, and my daughter has some that were Papa's clear back to 1933.
Wow.
And I have a crown of thorns that was in his potted plants, and a Chinese evergreen that was my mother's.
Wow.
And I've kept them growing all these years.
That's wonderful.
Oh, you might tell about the pencils. Coolidge's economy measures.
Oh.
They were, Coolidge administration had a stringent economic measure was put into effect, and the colored pencils that they used to mark those maps, oh, we thought they were wonderful. And Papa used to bring us home these little scraps of pencils, and we just, thought we really had something. Well, then, of course, they had to use them down to 2 inches, and they had to be turned back in. Papa used to talk about the salaries that he made and during the war. Why, he says coal haulers made 3 times the salary he made, and he was expected to have a BS degree, and they were making more money than he was. So,
Well, along with this Coolidge economy, they cut their wages too, and I can remember how mad Papa was.
well, that wasn't fair.
He
That
said,
was,
well, that's right, but they didn't cut them for the big boys farther up in the government, just the little people that were making little salaries.
difficult.
I don't think times have changed much.
Well, maybe so.
Well, and then too, they had to put up with how they had no adding machines or anything like that. And then you've got to think back to how severe the weather was. And we just don't count those things. I mean, we just take them for granted. That was a job.
They would have had no air conditioning in that.
No, and those screens and those big, huge windows, they were just open, and the flies and bugs and everything else flying around.
Well, the courtroom is the same way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Pop always kept a tie and an extra coat because when they had court, often people didn't have one with them, and they couldn't go in there without a tie and a coat. He always kept one there to loan them.
Is that right? Now that's
Yeah.
an angle I never heard that before. Well, now there was a downstairs office.
No. All of it was on the second floor. The post office, say this was the post office. This was Mr. Waldron's room. This was that great big room with the circular window, and that's where Papa had his desk. And this was the court
I see.
place here.
All on the second floor.
All on the second floor, the first half. Then there was a hallway clear through, and then these were other
I see.
things.
That's a great story. I like that.
Haven't you ever gone in the building?
Yes, but I haven't been in that. Well, I take it back. I was in it once since I've been back. We were gone for 40 years.
Well, they changed the stairway sometime or other, but when we were kids, the stairway wasn't quite the way it is now.
No, and then they put the elevator in, you know.
Well,
That's when they changed the stairs.
yeah.
Well, now you were telling us something a while ago, Catherine, about the dressograph escapade that you were in. Tell us that so we can get it on the tape.
Well, the addressograph was in the courtroom, just inside the door, and it was a fairly large machine, and it had a vertical column in which metal plates with addresses on them. And the plates would drop down and slide over a ink pad of some sort, and you'd stamp off the cards. There were several hundred, and they had to be printed every day, especially when there was bad weather. And this machine was operated by a lever that you kicked with your foot, and you just give it a hard kick, and it would print the card and drop the metal card down. And I got my thumb under it one time and smashed it, and it really hurt. And Papa wanted to bore a hole in my thumbnail, and I thought it hurt too bad, so I never let him, but it took it a year or more to grow out. But I sure remember it.
Now, the stamps, the cards that they sent out, I assume they just got those from the post office and paid for them.
Well, I don't know. It was free mailing anyway, and they were just about the size of an ordinary postcard.
Did you ever save one of those cards?
No.
Oh, and I've got things. I may have some downstairs, and I had the weather maps, but they all disintegrated. I mean, the paper turned yellow, and it just broke all to
Acid
pieces.
in the
Cheap.
paper.
But now those were the outline of the United States, and they just filled in, used that.
Yeah.
But he could take a list Oh, he used to just amaze me. He could take a whole list of numbers and just add a double column at one time.
Well,
He always made 99 in mathematics.
well, he must have been good. You were telling me about the telephone numbers a while ago. Tell us that again about the telephone numbers and his memory of the telephone numbers.
Papa called whenever there was an emergency and the cards couldn't have gone out in time. Why, he'd call all these people, farmers and businessmen, and he knew all the numbers, more than 100 numbers from memory, and he knew the people who had those numbers, knew them personally. And he'd just pick them up one right afternoon after another and call them.
From memory.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's terrific.
And that attested to why at his funeral he had so many, many floral offerings of just people we didn't even know that had known him, that he had done these favors for and called them all those years.
After the State Bureau was closed, he was sent to Keokuk.
Yes.
Because he was an expert in the river.
Mhm. Yes.
Well, now, was this, were you girls married by that time?
Oh, yes, I was gone by the time the post office. I married in 1929, and I was gone at the time the post office closed, because she lived here.
Yes, and then when he rented their home here, so when he retired they could come back. And they visited a lot.
Well,
He didn't have the long hours up there that he had here, and he got to enjoy vacations and things that he had never been able to do when he lived in Hannibal.
Well, did he ever retire and move back here?
No.
Well, my mother did after he passed away.
He passed away up in Keokuk.
Yes.
What year do you remember when he
Oh, yes. He died the day before Mama's birthday, February the 2nd in 1936. But the funny part about it was, we mentioned the economy measures. Well, they still were in force in 33. The government paid for the furniture going to Keokuk, and they allowed him mileage in the car. But when they asked him if his wife went along, he said yes. So they took off for her. And he always laughed. He said, they didn't ask me if anybody else rode, but he said, my oldest daughter was in the back seat. There was another an occasion when showing how chintzy they were. When my dad came down from Madison, my mother went to Chicago with my oldest sister. She was just a baby. And he was to meet her, and they were to go back to North Liberty together. Well, she didn't come in on the train he thought she would, so he waited an extra hour. Instead of getting on a train to go back, he waited for her, and it took an extra meal. Kept him over till supper time. And when he turned in his account, they knocked off 35 cents. They said, you could have taken an earlier train and been at home in time to eat. And I got the letter. That was one of the few things I just happened to have. I don't know when I got it or how I got it, but I just happened to have it.
That's great. That's great. What else do we have on the on your type page there?
Well, let's see. This is all about Papa. Well, Papa earned all the money that he paid his own way through college. He worked in the fields as a farmhand, and he was paid $100 a day. And that was twice the going rate, because 50 cents a day was what they were paying, but people who hired him said he could do the work of two men, so that he got double the amount, and he paid for every bit of his college himself.
There was one other question that occurred to me a while ago. You were talking about the Methodist Church, and was your father in the Methodist Church?
Yes, they belonged to the Methodist Church.
Okay.
And I have my cradle roll from 1907.
Oh, you do?
I've got my cradle roll too.
Who was the minister in those early days?
I don't know, maybe I've got a picture.
Oh, well, Mrs. Price
I'm
was
afraid
ahead
it's
of
in the
Sunday.
documents
I
instead of
wished
the-
I had brought those things, gotten those things together.
Well, I tell you, if I'd have thought about it, I had those things too, but they're not in, these are just Xerox copies. This is what I've done on my family.
Oh,
Pictures of all of them.
that's very good. You're
So
working
that-
on genealogy then.
Yes.
Oh, yes, we spent 10, 12 years working on it. Well, let's see.
There's another thing here I wanted to ask you about. First, where did you go to school? What grade school did you go to then?
We went up to, we started the North.
Let's talk a little bit about North School. You went to North School. Tell us about that.
Well, when we lived so close that we went to the North School. That's where the Pettibone School now stands. And I remember Mama was always saying, be sure and keep your window shades up, because something might happen during the night. Well, she had her shade up. And early in the morning when the North School burned, why, she saw it first thing. And after it had burned, they sent the pupils from the North School for half a day to the Central School. And our oldest sister taught her first year there, and she was going half a day, teaching half a day, and of course her wages were the same as if she taught the whole day, and she was so tickled. She had made twice that much.
Well, she made more money than Papa did, didn't she, at the
Yes,
time?
I think she did.
Because I can see them sitting around the dining room table going over finances and making a budget. And she was always very generous.
You remember what your father made? Just at
Yes,
any time?
yes,
At
yes.
any time?
He made $60 a month as a superintendent of schools, and he thought he'd better get into something that paid more.
Well,
So he
this
went to
is-
the Weather Bureau.
This is from the General Office of the Weather Bureau, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington, D.C. Mr. Timothy D. Firestone, Weather Bureau. Sir, you are hereby notified that you have been appointed to the position of observer role of the Weather Bureau at a salary of $1,440 per annum, effective July 1st, 1922, by promotion from $1,260 per annum on the same role. You will report for duty in writing to the Chief of the Weather Bureau. By direction of the Secretary of Agriculture, respectfully, R.P. Gladman, July 15th, 1922.
Now,
Well,
you've got the first one, too, don't you?
Yeah, well, yes. No, I think that's, I thought I did, but I don't. Oh, I have the one where he was accepted December 30th, 1906, on which date he will have served a probationary period of six months. And of course, if he didn't work out, why, that was the end of that.
Yeah.
But those big salaries are...
Oh, yeah.
Well, when I was in college, I know that it was my first year. I think it's about the time Coolidge administration went in, and they cut him to $132 a month. And he was sending me so much a month for my expenses, and I can remember how mad he was. He was a Republican.
Well, that was a terrible cut, you know, particularly if you had somebody in school.
Why, yes.
Yes, and so many girls in school took a lot of
That's right.
salaries like that for someone that...
Well, now, were you in school together? I mean, at the same time?
Well, no,
At
I tell you,
college?
she went. Her birthday is in October, so she went to school. Started to school in the fall. Well, my birthday is in January, and they had a double entry time, so I was a year and a half behind her to start with. And then I skipped the fourth grade, or half of the fourth grade, so I was on the even year. So then we were just 1 year apart.
There was something else on that north school that I wanted to ask you. You said that you went to school down at Central.
When it burned.
When it burned.
Uh-huh.
So I'm jumping back now on that. Then they built the Pettibone School. Did you, when they rebuilt it, did you go back to?
Oh, no,
Pettibone
I
School?
was in junior high
You
then.
went on to Central.
We stayed at Central in junior high, and from junior high, high school just had 3 years at that time.
Yeah.
So we went then to high school.
What did the North School celebrate Armistice Day in 1918? Get that?
Yes.
Tell us a few
Yes, they must have. Because I remember, I was just 8 years old, or wasn't quite 8 years old. And I can remember how cold it was. We just stood up. We each had they gave us each a little flag, and I still have the flag that they gave us.
Yes, I have.
Just a little flag. And we carried that in the parade.
Tell us about the parade.
I don't remember any more about it. I just remember it was terribly cold. I'm not sure whether there was snow and ice or not, but I can remember my feet always were cold. And I was just terribly cold. We had to stand up there and just wait and wait and wait till a certain bunch got so far up so we could join in.
Do you remember how you felt when they told you the World War I was over? The war was finished?
Didn't know too much about it.
I think when they blew the whistles and we were on our front porch, and we knew that something had gone on, but of course it didn't have too much of a meaning to us at that time. Only we could feel the excitement and the tension, and
The whole town just went wild.
yes, and of course we were downtown, so high, so we could hear everything. But going back to the school days when we had these terribly severe winters, our father would carry us in that deep snow up to school. And one time I couldn't get the door open. It was so heavy. And I ran back home, and it made me tardy, and I was just heartbroken.
Couldn't get the school door open.
No, there wasn't anyone there. I can just remember standing there in the cool. I must have been real little, though.
Yeah.
Young.
Well, isn't it odd how you remember little things like
Yes,
that? Really
but I can't remember. Catherine does.
Well,
It's been so long since I'd even thought about it.
Yeah.
Years ago, I thought, well, I'm going to do this. And I was doing other things and just slipped my mind until she said yesterday or the day before. And I just thought, well, now, what will I think of? And I just sat down and wrote a little bit and
This is good.
Well,
stopped and did something else. And pretty soon I had another idea and I put it down. That's why it's all in a jumble.
You
is there
said,
ever anything else? Excuse me, Robert.
I was going to ask about your music lessons. Did you know the Bates girls?
Oh, yes. Allegra and I and Ona's all took music lessons from Mrs. Loomis, piano. And then when I was about 13, why, I wanted a violin. So my folks got me a violin. And I took lessons from Laureen Bates. And I took for her for, quite a long while. And I played in the Bates Stringed Ensemble. And we went all over northeast Missouri here giving concerts and things. And when we were little, though, Allegra and I played piano duets. And we just played all the time at church functions and various things. And then later on, why, she played piano for me for my solos.
Did the Bateses live where the Robards house is there on 6th
They lived
Street?
on Church and, what was it, 6th, 7th, 9th and Church?
9th and Church.
The house is still there, and I pass it when I come up on that street from going to the National. I'm not sure, but it was on Church Street, I'm pretty sure.
At one time, they lived on 6th Street, but I think that was later in the
Well,
Robards house.
course, when I went away to school, they quit giving lessons then and started on a tour. And I took lessons then from a Mr. Hofstadt that came up from St. Louis once a week, and he quit then. And then I took from Tracy Holbrook. Mr. Holbrook was quite a talented violinist, and his wife was an organist, and they played for the music for the Old Star Theater down there on Main Street, South Main. And they didn't have the music then, you know. They had live music with the pictures, and they followed a schedule to play certain things when certain things came on. And he and his wife did that.
You didn't ever play for a silent movie?
No.
That's fine.
Was
I did one.
Holbrook the man that...
Yes, I have an account
Tracy
of his-
Holbrook. I think he was killed. It was while I was gone. He was killed in a car wreck, I believe.
No, he died from the. I have just wrote that yesterday in the book.
Oh, well,
I
I
wrote
often-
the account of his death in the drought of the 1930s. He died of heat exhaustion.
Oh, well, I
Just
thought
because he was apparently in poor condition and just died because of the death was attributed
was-
to the heat.
he was real small and real dark and sort of swarthy. And she was rather blonde and quite large. Now, they had no children, but she had been married before and did have.
Mm-hmm.
But they were awfully nice. I'd go down there, and the Star Theater, there was a stairway going up, and he had, they had apartments over the theater.
I wanted to ask you too. Now, did Ona's marry?
Ona's, yeah, she's been married twice.
Uh-huh.
She married
What is her last name?
Theodore Johnson, Kaupt.
Kopp. All right, I have
Mhm.
that. All right, and she lives in
And
Santa Barbara.
after he died, why, she later married his brother. And they're,
All right. Now,
his name was Lawrence.
When we took lessons from, Catherine took violin lessons from the Bates. They lived at 201 South 10th Street.
On the corner of
And
Church.
then Catherine and I took piano lessons from Miss Zimmerman on 7th Street.
Teresa Zimmerman.
And she then went to St. Louis and taught in St. Louis. I can't think of Miss Zimmerman's.
Teresa.
Teresa Zimmerman. Miss Teresa Zimmerman.
Her folks were, she lived with her parents. They were elderly from Switzerland. And
She lived on 7th Street.
Let me ask you some questions unrelated here. Now, do you have some more material?
I wanted to ask each one how they met their husbands.
Oh, well, John just lived over the hill from us. You know, we lived on 8th, and I could watch him coming down over the hill when he was coming up to our house.
well, you met him at school.
Oh, yes. Well, I had met him at school.
Well, I met my first husband because he was my violin teacher at Cotty College where I went to school.
What was his name? I may have
David Stump,
David Stump.
S-T-U-M-P.
And he was a teacher at Cotty College.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be on the tape. I don't need to write it, really. And then where'd you meet
And
him?
my second husband, I met him, and he died then in 52, and then in 56 I married Wilbur Everts. And I met him, he worked at the employment office across the street from where I worked, from the side garage.
So you met them both in Hannibal and were married in Hannibal.
No, David Stump was, both of them were from Pennsylvania, but I married him, I met him and married him in Nevada.
Okay, but then your second marriage was in Hannibal,
No, my second marriage was in Kansas City.
in Kansas City. Okay, where were you and John married?
Here in Hannibal.
Here in Hannibal.
And our oldest sister was married in Kansas City.
Okay, I just wanted that on the tape for the history. It kind of tells more about who you are and
Well,
it's more about your life.
Yes.
Let me ask you if you have any more material about or information about your folks or the period of time in which your father was with the weather station, or about the weather station itself. Do you have any other things there? I have some other questions I want to ask you.
I don't know that we do. Didn't we get a... Well, I can remember a personal affair that was quite traumatic at the time. Our neighbor on 7th Street had gotten a big load of sand, and in this sand evidently was a snake. Oh, it was... I thought it was about a mile long, but it probably was about 1.5 feet. Well, Papa killed it. It was in the yard, and Papa killed it. I never did know what kind it was. But he took a stick, and he had it draped over it, and he called us to come out and see it. Well, I don't know how it happened, but he sort of pushed it towards me, and it's frightened me. I don't know when I ever was so scared. I ran in the house and went upstairs into a closet and closed the door, and it was in the summer and it was hot. I must have stayed an hour, and it was dark and hot, and I can remember I thought, oh, I'm going to die, but I didn't, so I opened the door and came out.
Oh, most people are frightened by snakes.
I'm still scared of them.
I think most people really are. Now, most people, a lot of people will even pick them up, but they really don't like them, you know.
And most of them are harmless.
That's right.
And they do a lot of good, too.
That's right. They kill rodents and bugs and all that sort of thing.
But I would just rather not have their association. They like our fish pool out here in front of the house. They enjoy climbing over that. I thought it was a hose, and my little granddaughter was with me, and I couldn't find anybody home in the neighborhood to come over and kill that snake, and I didn't know what to do. It was big. So finally she ran up at the storage and got out a hoe and killed it. I didn't think she would ever do that, but she did. But that was draped up over the window, and I thought it was the hose.
Why, it was probably a black snake.
Yes.
They're
Well,
harmless.
Well, and it got into the, it camouflaged itself in the, this plant down here by the door. The yucca plant.
Uh-huh.
And we could see it coiled around in there, but it had been in the fish pools where it was fish.
We had our air conditioner, a little problem with it. The fellow was out the other day, and there was snake skin in our condenser out in the yard. That's the second one that's been in that thing over the years. So apparently there's something, the heat or the cold of it, something that draws them in there too. Well, let me ask you some questions, other questions then. Were you involved or in the Mark Twain celebration in 1935?
No, I wasn't here.
Do you remember the Dust Bowl days? Any dust in the
Yes,
air?
the Dust Bowl days. No,
Oh,
I
yes.
wasn't here either. I was in southwest Missouri.
Oh.
But I can remember how terribly dry it was.
You have any memories of the Depression? Anything that you
Oh,
yeah.
very definite.
Oh, yes.
I think everybody was, of our vintage, was very well versed on that.
Yes,
Because you could see the way we save even now, when it really isn't necessary, but we still economize. So we had a good lesson.
Well, I well remember it because we had our bank account in a bank in Arkansas, Berryville, Arkansas, and it went broke. And we lost everything we had. And I don't know whether at that time, whether any of it was ever paid back, but I think they paid back, maybe a penny on $100 or something, and we got just a few cents out of it.
Can you recall, maybe you can't, but can you recall your feelings at the time you heard that bank was broke?
Well, no, I don't remember. I know it was sort of a shock. But aside from that, I don't know. I didn't do any of the bookkeeping, and I didn't do any of the worrying about the finances, but all I know was that there wasn't anything down there. And we watched for years to see if they paid anything off, and it wasn't enough to even think about.
In Hannibal, there have been so many things that were of interest for a period of time, some of them long periods of time, the railroads. You have any recollections of the railroads?
Yes. It happened to be right behind us was a Mr. Clark on 7th Street, and he was a railroad man. And at the time of the railroad strikes, he was one of the men laid off, or was one of the strikers. Well, they had several court cases in which the so-called people, they called them scabs, were beaten up, those that went back to work, and they beat them up pretty bad. And there was a trial there in the courthouse up on the 2nd floor, and they accused different ones, and this one man was up at court, and he was supposed to have beaten up a fella. Well, this Mr. Clark had been one of the men that had gone down to watch, and the man right in the middle of the case says, "Why, that isn't the man who beat me up." He says, "That man over there." And that was Mr. Clark. He said, "He's the one that beat me up." Well, a long time after that, Mr. Clark came over to he was off work, and our backyard sort of met there in the alley between 7th and 8th Street. He came over, and he was talking to Papa, and they were looking at it. We had pet rabbits. We raised some rabbits, and he was talking about the rabbits, and he mentioned the fact that this had happened, and he was accused, and he said, "I'm not guilty." And Papa said, "Well, when was that?" And he said, "Well, it was such and such a date." And Papa happened to, just something sort of clicked in his mind, so he went down to the Weather Bureau the next day. He looked at the time, he looked at the weather, and it just clicked in his mind something. Well, Mr. Clark had come over, and I was out there with Papa, and I sort of wanted to show off, so I picked up this big rabbit, and I took him on my arm, and he scratched me with his hind leg, and it bloodied me all the way up. I had the scar for about 20 years, and it bled a little. Well, just about the time that happened, the excursion boat came down from Quincy, and they turned on their whistle for the bridge, and Onis and Allegra had gone on the boat. And I thought, boy, they brought me something down from Quincy. So I ran into the house. Well, Mr. Clark looked on that date, and somehow Papa remembered, well, that was about that Mr. Clark was over there talking to him at the same time that I got scratched and that the girls were on the boat. So they connected it all up, and they found the time that he was supposed to have beaten up this man. He was over at our house, and they had proof that I got hurt. That was one thing, and the whistle on the boat was at the bridge. That set the time. So the case was taken to Kansas City, and Papa didn't have to go to Kansas City, but they took an affidavit, and they took it to Kansas City, and he got off. And it was all connected by the weather and the boat and the rabbit.
Well, that's
a good story.
That's interesting.
316 North 7th.
Yeah,
They had a son about our
316
age.
North 7th, and we lived at 508. Our yard's just sort of cattywampus.
What was his
And
first name, Mr. Clark?
They had a boy about our
Clark,
age. He was in
John
school
Clark.
with me, I think.
John L. Clark.
Mr.
was
John
the
L.
man.
Clark. Let's get that on the tape, because that's a pretty good story about the strike, too.
Yeah.
Well, now, was Mr. Clark a union man, or was he...
I think he was. I'm not sure.
Doesn't make any difference.
It must have been he was a union man, because this other man accused him of beating him up. They were beating him up
Yes.
because
Right.
they went back to work.
I
Yes.
see.
I think that was it.
Uh-huh. Well, there were certainly a lot of feelings hurt and a lot of permanent scars of that railroad strike. I remember that supposedly there were some shots fired off of Lover's Leap down into
Oh,
the,
yes.
into the shops there.
I don't remember just when it was, but I remember that I didn't get to go on the boat. And Allegra and Onis went. Onis would go on these Sunday school excursions, and she'd take first one of us and then the other. We'd go up, spend the day, and come back on the boat.
What do you remember about boat excursions?
What do we remember?
Uh-huh.
Well, of course,
They're
the
almost a thing
calliope
of the
was the
past.
thing, and the green river we had to drink. Soda?
Green River.
Oh, my. To me, that was the most beautiful color. I don't know how good it was, but
Oh,
the
yes,
color
it was delicious. Never
the
got
color
it anywhere
was just,
else.
And it was called Green River.
Uh-huh.
I've never
Yeah.
heard of that.
Very,
I'd forgotten it, but I can remember it.
Yes,
Yeah,
it is
sure,
such
I can
a
remember.
Remember,
precious color.
we had that big place, and here was
Yeah.
the bar over here where you could get your drinks and sit out here and go around on the outside.
Oh, that was a treat. That was really a treat. Can you imagine a child nowadays thinking a bottle of soda would be a treat?
Well,
That's
I
an
think
everyday occurrence.
Yeah.
And a
a
nice
child
big
nowadays would think one of those boat excursions was a treat. So
Oh,
that was
yes.
a wonderful treat.
Of course, later on, they had so many boats on the river themselves.
Sure, yeah.
Trips they took on the river and down the coast.
You remember the first radio you ever heard?
Yes,
Yes.
our neighbor
Mr. Wilson.
over on 8th Street had,
Charlie Wilson.
yes.
Made one. He was
And, oh, that was really wonderful. That was
a
really
telephone
something.
lineman for many, many years.
Well, that was quite an innovation when those came in. How about TV?
I remember the first one I heard.
Yes,
saw.
we had one of the first ones in Hannibal. We had just moved up here in '33, and we had the country club had one, and we got one because they had fairly good reception. Well, of course, anything would be good in those days.
Yeah. As long as you could make out what it was.
Yes, that's right.
Well, now, I'm very interested in this. Now, this was 1933?
When we had ours up here, I wish John had stayed up here.
Well,
Well, you moved up here in Valentine's
yes.
Day of 52.
52.
Because Dave died then in the last day
Yes.
of November.
Not February.
well, it would have been 52 then.
Yes, instead of 33.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I was going to ask you something else.
Do you have any knowledge of the old reservoir up here on the hill?
Well, it was. Now that's what John could tell
Do you
me
have
about.
a picture of it by chance? If you tell me a little bit about that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, the reservoir was completely out when we came up here. I hadn't seen it in several years, but it had been, well, where the house is now, all the dirt from where the reservoir is set over by the Jays there was moved over here where we are. It was pushed out here in a point, and we picked this place because we didn't have to put in any fill. Now, water pipes are going bad in 30 years because there's some kind of acid in the ground from the old reservoir.
You mean they're going bad now?
Yes, the street, ours went bad first, now the others are going bad. On the city out there, they keep repairing. But this dirt that's around the house here, see the houses over there, they're sitting pretty near on rock.
I was down to Mr. Jones' house the other day. Everett Jones, is it? And there's an old valve down there that he thinks was a part of that, the outlet down that way.
Could have been very well, because that was the only place the water was going from up here was down the hill there.
Well, who else came up on the hill? Now, we're talking about Cardiff Hill now,
Yes,
up here.
yes.
The reservoir was taken out actually by WPA workers sometime during the Depression days. It was dismantled at that time, and the stones removed, leveled off at that
That's
time.
right.
But then, tell me now about who came up here about the time you did, and who bought this originally from the city, do you know?
Nobody from the city that, well, yeah, sure, some of it.
Judge Fuller.
Judge Fuller was the one that had it all, and Garvey Lands bought it from him, and we bought from Garvey.
I see.
Garvey bought the whole thing. He was going to build a house up here and swimming pool and so forth and so on. And when things changed, why, we bought this one lot.
Yeah. Well, now, who has the lot next to you?
Well, Albert Franklin.
No, Albert's gone.
Albert Franklin bought the lot.
Oh,
I think so, and
well,
built the
he
house
sold it
next
there.
door to us.
Yeah.
Dr. Sussman built the one where the Millers live, Frank Miller lives.
And then Allegra Scyoc bought the house, built the house where Albert and Miriam Hoffman lived.
Yes.
And then the daughter of Garvey and Betty Lyons that married Frank Saltzman, they built across the street.
No,